welcome back. Still watching Business Morning here on Channels Television. Now, looking into Nigeria now, the International Labour Organization has disclosed that the micro, small and medium enterprises, that's the MSMEs, contribute 48% of Nigeria's national gross domestic product. They account for 96% of businesses and 84% of employment in the country. That means if Nigeria is talking about development or growing its GDP, then attention must be given to the MSMEs. Yesterday we talked about smallholder farmers. I mean, they are part of this picture, and sometimes it seems they're just at the bottom there. Meanwhile, they do hold very important place in food security, in manufacturing, in employment, and mopping up against insecurity in the country. Well, let's dwell on this with Daniel Foley. He's the founder and chief executive officer of SoftLink AI. He joins us virtually to have this conversation. Good morning, Mr. Foley. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Good morning, Amy. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so when we look at the MSMEs, we've had a lot. I mean, we have SMEDAN and a whole lot of agencies. We have plans, or we have heard of plans, for funding, which seems to be a major part of their problems. But let's be real now and look at MSMEs in Nigeria. What are they looking like? What is their state of health at this time?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say because this is a very, very broad audience you're talking about. We all know that, with the war in Ukraine, many SMEs, also in Nigeria, also affected in the sense that the inputs that they need to produce their goods and services, all of a sudden has gone up, right? And so they're suffering from that. However, opportunities are there. The thing with SMEs is that they're very resilient, right? Especially Nigerian entrepreneurs. And so we're confident that, in the end, everything, will be well. However, in terms of loans and access to funds, that is still a big problem, because the reality is this: you can, if you want to maintain the status quo as a business, you can continue to turn over, right? So just turn over what you earn, keep some profit, pay employees. But if you want to grow, growth always requires funding, right? And access to funding is still a major problem on the continent. And I think that it's about time that we do something about it as a country.
Well, but we've heard a lot of things being done about it. We have SMEDAN, for instance, and some other agencies. We've seen efforts to encourage, both from the private and the public sector, to encourage small businesses, startups. Are you saying these efforts are not effective or they are not enough?
Okay, so I mean, that's a very good question. The thing with efforts is the current efforts that we have, they are good, but they're not enough, right? If you look at the population, right, in the grand scheme of things, the numbers of SMEs and SMEs that exist in Nigeria is over 50 million, right? And when you look at the opportunities to funding, there is still a very big problem. So we have SMEDAN, like you said, we have the likes of Tony Nimelu Foundation, we have other foundations that have also, helped with different grants and different opportunities to give SMEs to funding. But what you would find out is, there's a problem. So I'll analyze the problem for you. So if you look at SMEs, there are two ways we can look at it. We can look at startups and we can look at SMEs. So a startup is a small business in terms of the amount of people, required to start a technology startup company. Usually 2 or 3 founders can start a company, right? However, the difference between a technology startup, right, and the SME, our usual SME, is the fact that a tech startup is designed to scale fast, right? The whole idea of a startup is to build a product that can scale nationally and globally, right, and do significant revenue in a very short period of time. And that's what gives the startup, a very unique opportunity. We've seen, the likes of Uber, Airbnb, we've seen the likes of Paystack and Flutterwave, typically rise from almost nothing. No one saw them coming, and they took the market by the storm. Now, the problem with this category of startups, right, which I also run a startup, SoftLink.ai, is the fact that locally, there is very little opportunity in terms of access to funding. If you look at the successful technology startup companies on the continent, majority of them, 90 to 95% of them, actually got their startup capital, their funding, right, from the US or from the UK, or from the international space. We do not have enough, Nigerians making investments in technology startup companies. Yes, I know we have the likes of the Lagos Investment, Network, Lagos Angels Network, and then we have a couple of, accelerators here and there. But by the time you look at the source of funding for many of these accelerators, it's also international. Okay, and so that is something that we're hoping that with the Startup Act that the federal government just passed, and then incentivizing angel investment in technology company, which is something that we need to do, and we need to use policies as an instrument to make that. If I'm a salary earner and I've done very well, or I am an high net worth individual, right, and high net worth individual, what incentive is the federal government giving me, or is the government giving me, to invest in a high risk technology startup company? And I have to use the word high risk because, of course, an investment, nobody likes to throw money away, and we know that technology startups, are high risk. A startup can start today, fold up in the next 12 months, and the money is gone, and that's okay. That's part of development and innovation. And so we need to find ways to implement policies that incentivize high net worth individuals in the country to actually make investment in their own technology startup company. Now on the other hand, you have the the SMEs. Now usually the right place for SMEs to get funding is not to go to angel investors can help, yes, but not to go to accelerators, or to go to take, for instance, private equity firms. No, usually the best source of funding to a large extent for SMEs and MSMEs is actually the bank. So you find out that we don't have banks doing enough in terms of, you want to take a loan of 10 million naira, the bank will ask you to go and bring, your great grandfather's, land title, and all those long list of criteria. Now, how can we fix this? Because this is a problem that has lasted, for many years, and the banks seem, to be doing nothing. However, the foundation of the problem is the fact that the banks understand the limitations and the challenges that these MSMEs face. One of those limitations is importation of goods, right? We know that Nigeria has a very high GDP, but you find out that 80 to 90% of our GDP are actually, foreign goods entering into the country that we are consuming. And so what the banks understand is that even if you are bringing in some goods, from China or from anywhere, if you get stuck at the port, there's a problem with whatever loan they have given you. Right, and so you may not be able to pay back, on that kind of loan. They also understand that you have, challenges in terms of, e-commerce. You have challenges in terms of, shipping these goods from one place to the other. Okay, and so they know that there's a problem with you having, selling that goods. Now the bank also know that we don't have a consumer credit, right, as a nation. And so even if you have the goods, the audience, your target audience, may not have the required, resources or disposable income to buy your goods and services in the way you have estimated, on your projections. And so they understand that, look, they look at that business, and all of a sudden what they see is just risk. So what we can do, and what I think, the Nigerian government has been able to do, and we've done now, is the fact that the foundation of these problems, are now being fixed with, the likes of the new Lekki Deep Seaport that will help with the seaport. We have the Lekki Free Trade Zone right now that will help with local content manufacturing, and I think that if those problems are taken away, which of course the Lekki Free Trade Zone is there, the Deep Seaport has been commissioned, the Lagos State as an economic hub is now having its own interrail, system. So with all of those, being sorted, and we hope that the next government now can build on that and create consumer credit, the banks now begin to see SMEs, as a very viable partner in terms of a customer in terms of loans, and at the same time they want to partner more with them and give generous loans, right? So that we can make sure that most SMEs not only maintain status quo but are actually growing and can employ more people. That is how we're going to create more employment in the country.
Yeah, so I know you are in the technology, ICT and tech, so that's why you are really focusing on that. But, you also have the other aspect, which is also important, the MSMEs that are involved in agricultural value chain, because food insecurity is a big challenge facing the country at this time. And I know you talked about the issue of exports and all of that, but maybe if we look inwards first and see what's happening in the agri value chain with MSMEs, some people have the notion that a great idea will always attract the right investment and funding, so the issue of funding shouldn't be there. So what do you see in this area?
Yeah, thank you, Ine. So you see, food security is a very big challenge, especially for African leaders who have to deal with growing population, food security issues, and industrialization all at the same time. So, one would expect that this is something that we've done, we should have done many years before now. However, what these SMEs need to do, right? And if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, is the fact that let's take, for instance, look at the food that is coming, to the Nigerian consumer, for instance. You find out that we have, raw food. So people go to the market, you buy, your raw tomatoes, you buy your yam fresh from the farm and all that. Maybe these things maybe come from different parts of the nation, and then they are distributed. That is the current, value chain that we have, or that is the current supply chain that we have. However, some of those things need to be modernized in the way it's done. Take, for instance, many of the businesses that are involved in farming, right, and in food produce now need to start thinking of forward or backward integration, in the sense that we need to start looking at our tomatoes and saying, okay, look, how can we convert this tomato into ketchup? We need to look at some of this food produce, because again, the current value chain that we have and the current supply chain that we have in the food, sector is the fact that we also have a lot of waste based on this current design. You see, some tomatoes in the process of transportation before they arrive, at the point of sale, those tomatoes are already rotten. Okay, so we have waste in this current system that we're running. And so the way to reduce that waste is by food processing, which is forward integration, a next step forward, right? And there are lots of businesses in Nigeria, I would say. I know you're talking about the MSMEs, but, some of these MSMEs, of course, pick items from some farmers who, are maybe large-scale farmers or, small-scale farmers. In any way, there is need to now begin to add food processing into the value chain to reduce waste, and that is also going to require funding. So if you look at it, it's more like a chicken and egg issue, right? You need funding, to save more, right, and produce more quality food, because again, we can also come into the subject of quality and hygiene in terms of the current supply chain. So the current supply chain is there, but it's not perfect. It needs to be improved on, and capital needs to come in to make that happen.
Yeah, well, the issue of quality is another subject matter. But so it doesn't look like it's all gloomy, when it comes to MSMEs. At least we have one thing working for us in Nigeria. The market is there. Once you can scale through and have a product, then you are sure of a market.
Yes, you're 100% right. It's not gloomy at all, and I would say that it's actually bright, right? Brighter than it has ever been. And I say this with all sense of duty, because if you look at it, number one is the Nigerian entrepreneurs are passionate, right? Nigerian entrepreneurs are hardworking, they're passionate, and they put their hearts to the business. So that is working for us. So no matter the storm or the challenges, we are able to weather it because of grit. The other part, right, is in terms of infrastructure development that we are having as a nation. So let me tell you what has been happening, Ini, and I think this might help break it down a bit. One of the things we do not know, maybe many people don't know, especially as a country, is the fact that over the last 50, 60 years, the moment Nigeria got more productive, Nigeria got poorer. Okay, I'll say that again. Nigeria got poorer when we got more productive, and I'll tell you why. Any good and anything productive has an energy cost attached to it. So if you look at a product like this, for instance, right, it has an energy cost attached to it. And so if you look at that, when you make a phone call, there's an energy cost attached. When you produce, a cup or anything, you have an energy cost attached to it. Okay, and so with that, what that means is that if you want to be productive, right? If you look at the foundation of Nigeria's sorry, hold on a second. Okay, sorry. So if you look at our productivity, the problem has always been the fact that every productive efforts that we have, there's an energy cost attached, and with that energy, we do not produce our own refined petroleum product. So what that means is that we always have to import, fuel, and that way we are exporting our productivity, the gains that we're supposed to have from our productivity. And so what we need to do, which is what has been done already, is the Dangote refinery, making sure that the moment Nigeria got productive, right, that wealth stays in this country. Right, and that is something that's going to help us.
Daniel, thank you so much. I was hoping we could have that conversation without talking about oil and gas, because it seems Nigeria begins and ends with oil and gas, and sometimes that can be, heartbreaking, because we've been talking about diversifying the economy, even though some people say we've diversified the economy, but the source of revenue is what we have not diversified. But thank you so much, Daniel Foley, for joining us and sharing your thoughts this morning. Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Softlink.ai.
Thank you, Ine, for having me.
Let's take a break now. When we come back, it will be commodities time. Welcome back to Watching Business Morning here on Channels Television. It's commodities time, and for the second time this week we have Dumebi Oluwole joining us. She's still fresh though from England. I couldn't help that. Sorry, Dumebi.
Whenever you're ready,
then I'll get used to it. Okay, all right. Thank you for being patient with me. So Dumebi, I don't know what's going on with the oil, global oil. So we're expecting, in fact, Russia had announced that they were going to cut their oil, 500,000.
Yes.
Now we see 300,000. And then we also see a dip in U.S. reserve. We talked about, some of those factors that are affecting global oil prices, and there are even more factors coming up again.
Exactly. So the global oil market right now is being whirled by so many events. On Tuesday, we mentioned what's happening with Saudi Arabia, China, and Iran, and how that is affecting oil supply and oil prices. We've also looked at, spoke about Iraq and Turkey, and how that is also affecting supply.
And that's not been resolved yet.
That's still not been
I think
resolved.
It's now a legal matter.
Exactly, it's a legal battle now between both countries, and the longer that escalates, the longer oil supply will be cut short from the global market.
And I think there's about 450,000 barrels a
Exactly,
day.
yes.
Wow.
Between 400,000 to 450,000 barrels of oil that is stuck, as this legal battle between both countries continue. And then we also, like you rightly said, we also have what's happening with the U.S. Inventories, and there's an inverse relationship between that and oil prices. So then we also have, like you said again, OPEC meeting is coming up soon, and
that conversation around the dollar.
Exactly. So the conversation around whether they're going to continue mopping up supply to keep prices around $80 per barrel, so that it's beneficial for all exporting countries. And there's also a conversation about whether they're going to continue trading with the US dollar for oil, especially when it comes to China. So there's a lot of dynamics going on in the oil market, and we're seeing that affect oil prices. Oil prices have, this morning about $80 per barrel, and then like the day before it almost went down again to about $78 per barrel. So many events whirling the oil market, and we're going to continue to see this, especially with the fact that fears of a global recession has resurfaced, and now it is even more intense than last year when we're just having talks about it. Now with the fact that we've seen what has happened with the global banking system, with the turmoil happening with the banking system globally, we're seeing that is already beginning to feed into recession fears, and also the fact that the U.S. Fed is still they're continuing with their monetary policy tightening cycle,
and they're not falling for that financial banks thing.
They're not. So their goal right now is just to tame inflation, and until they do that, the plan is that let's tame inflation, let's focus on our primary objective, then we can resuscitate the economy.
Then we can deal with the consequences later.
Exactly. So, and that's, we're also seeing that happening with the ECB and other, global central banks that are doing the same thing. We also saw the same move even with the monetary policy in Nigeria. So clearly, the move to continue hiking rates to tame inflation, that is also fueling inflation. That's also fueling global recession fears. And with that happening, that's definitely going to affect oil prices. We saw what happened with COVID-19. We saw what happened with the 2008-2009 financial crisis, and how that a global recession definitely means lower oil prices. The correlation is too stark, and clearly, if the global economy slips into a recession, we will definitely see oil prices slip below $80 per barrel. And when we bring that home to see what that means for us, it definitely means lower oil revenue. And remember that by
but cheaper subsidy.
Exactly. I was just going to get that with the fact that by H2 was seeing there are chances that the government is going to maintain its commitment to removing fuel subsidies. We would see that payment of the imports on refined petroleum products would decline, and the federal government might have just a little more money to do other things in the economy. And a significant thing to mention is that during the MPC meeting, one of the reasons why the Monetary Policy Committee actually hiked interest rates was more like a precautionary move to anchor inflation expectations ahead of the fuel subsidy removal. And the expectation is that if fuel subsidy is removed, inflation will increase further, and that's because transport costs will also increase due to higher fuel prices. And if that happens, cost of living will also increase. But just to anchor inflation expectations, to say, you know what, we're on our game here, we're trying to tame inflation, we're trying to keep so that there's no speculative buying of the naira, the investors are not fleeing, just to narrow the negative rates of return on investment. So basically that was one of the reasons why the MPC increased interest rates. So this monetary policy tightening cycle, the global recession fears are definitely major things to look out for the oil market going forward.
And even our first guest talked about the impact expected from Dangote, and
yes,
there's high expectation from
yes,
there. What buffer do you think could come from that aspect? I mean, at the point where subsidy is removed.
I mean, on the surface, remember that this deal, the Dangote refinery, the deal on the surface, what it is the government supplies Dangote or crude oil, he refines and then sells, and we have refined petroleum products to actually export and then also use for domestic use. But the bigger question is, if it is not so productive, because Dangote is in it for business, right? If it's not so beneficial, not so profitable for him to refine and then sell to Nigerians, and he will definitely look for a market elsewhere. I mean, Dangote is not just a Nigerian company; it's practically an African company.
And it's a free trade zone.
Free trade, yes. So, and this is happening within the free trade zone. So there's an open market for Dangote to sell to other countries. And remember that Nigeria is currently selling the price of petrol in Nigeria is one of the lowest in Africa. So if he's going to sell, but I mean, with the fact that fuel subsidy is going to be removed, it clearly means that market prices could be more reflective, and this would encourage Dangote to actually sell, to Nigerians. If this happens, it just, it would encourage, or what it would do is that prices of the price of petroleum products like diesel and PMS could actually begin to decline with time. But I mean, there's usually a time lag between when these policies are enacted, when the production actually happens, and when it actually begins to take full effect on the economy. But in between that, this is the short-term implication. When fuel subsidies are removed, fuel prices are going to increase. Nigerians are going to spend more on fuel and transport costs, and this is going to feed into their cost of living and all that. But in the meantime, the expectation is that that fuel subsidies will be removed gradually as well. So just so that the impact on
is not very harsh.
So we won't see PMS prices skyrocket.
No, I think a trade union has pegged it between 300 and 400. I mean, I guess that's their own calculation.
Sure,
but
yes.
I brought up that question about Dangote because Nigerians are very expectant.
Yes.
And I think it's better for us to manage our expectations so we don't get too disappointed if it doesn't work that way, because federal government has said they will give Dangote crude. Are they giving him for free? Do you understand?
Yes.
If they are going to sell that crude to Dangote at the global price, then, I mean, Dangote, as you noted, they're here to make money. So we shouldn't expect that there's a miracle once Dangote starts operation, Dangote refinery starts operating, then suddenly we're going to be buying petrol for 115 naira or something like that. I think it is very important that we manage our expectation, because this is part of what, at the end of the day, people will be like, oh, government has lied again, or Dangote has lied again, because we have painted the wrong picture from onset, and people have had it in their head, and so they don't see what they expected to see.
Well, I mean, you're very right about that, and this is where anchoring expectations come in. Basically, it's just that simple. This is a business that is going to get crude oil from the federal government to not only service the domestic market, but to export. And remember, the exporting here is the bigger goal. Right, and this is because if we look at what's happening with our electricity, right, we produce so much that we export it, not just because our transmission lines are not, capable enough, we're not strong enough to transmit everything to Nigerians. That is one of the reasons why we're not enjoying so much electricity today, just because the grids are not enough to, or rather are not strong enough. The infrastructure is not strong enough to transmit all the generated electricity that we have to Nigerians. So if we put all of this into perspective, okay, how much infrastructure has gone into moving the refined petroleum products from the refinery across the country? We do not yet have these rail lines. We do not yet have these pipelines. So how long will it take the government to actually, invest in this infrastructure to ensure that from Dangote refinery, someone at Zamfara can get this refined petroleum, can get refined products from Lagos here. So until all these logistics are put in place and everyone can see it in the open, to say, okay, this is exactly how the government ensures that, how the government plans that this crude that was selling to Dangote at this price, this is the refined petrol, this is what the price is going to be. This is how much we're going to get to actually, transport or to service the domestic economy. Because remember, Nigeria actually, according to the NNPC, I think we on a daily basis, we consume over 60 million liters.
That's another area of controversy.
Exactly. But just for that
yes,
reason,
at least that's what we have from the officials.
From the officials. So this is what we have. So what is the plan to transport this on a daily basis to ensure that, because using trucks, using this, we've seen how inefficient this is. We've seen how inefficient this process is and how expensive it is. Because when you look at the fact that there's informal taxation going on across,
there's insecurity going on
as well. The roads are not good enough. We've seen just along this Lagos about actually, how many times we've seen
how many hours we spent to get to this place this morning.
Let's not even get into that conversation, but we've seen the picture. So clearly there has to be a lot of infrastructure to go into this to ensure that the domestic economy is serviced, and then we export this refined petroleum crude. And remember, this is not just the Nigerian government's money. This is Dangote's money.
And Dangote is here to do business.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Dumebi Oluwole, for painting a clearer picture there now, Senior Analyst with Financial Derivatives Company. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's take a breather. When we come back, we'll head to the markets. Welcome back. Still watching Business Morning here on Channels Television. Let's slip take a flight now to London, where we have Juliana standing by. Juliana, good morning. Good to have you bright and early this morning, Juliana. So, Juliana, talk to us about that report about fraud in public places. I mean, we're used to fraud issues in Nigeria, but I mean, Africa generally, unfortunately. But what's that report about fraud and public spending?
Yes, fraud is everywhere, not just in Africa. Britain has its own issues with fraudulent activities, and not just with the public, also with ministers, but that's a topic for another day. But yes, we have had some information released this morning from the National Audit Office, basically looking at the coffers in the Treasury, and alarmingly, they have found that fraudulent activities has been pushed to an extreme rate here in the United Kingdom, and according to public observers, the government just are not able to tackle this on its own. They've been looking at data from 2020 to 2021, basically when the country was in lockdown and the government were offering so many incentives for people to stay at home, including business schemes where I think people literally at a click of a button with one page were able to get £50,000. That's cost the taxpayer £21 billion in fraudulent activities. That's what the National Audit Office are basically saying has been lost, with people lying and taking money from the government. Now, according to the government, they've been able to claw back about £1 billion, but that's just not really enough, which is why now opposition parties are asking for the government to do more and to clamp down on those that misused public funds, because of course, Innie, this money hasn't come from the government, it has come from British people, British taxpayers. So it's only right that they take accountability for this. And if you look at the figures in 2018-2019, the government lost about 5.5 billion when it came to departments under the DWP, work and pensions. So clearly we can see that COVID was an issue. And that £21 billion that was lost to COVID funds, that doesn't include the £10 billion odd every year that the government loses to other fraudulent activities. So it's quite alarming, and it's quite interesting that this is something that is not going to hit the major headlines here in Britain. But of course, if this was a story in Nigeria, yes, I think it would be much bigger. So yes, fraudulent activities take place across the world, not just in Africa, but in Europe too.
Yeah, interesting, Juliana. As you know, that if it was back here, I mean, it would be everywhere. But you also have that about energy costs being cut down by 2035, Juliana. What's the strategy?
Gosh, I tried to have a look at the strategy before I came into the studio, but what Grant Shapps, the Energy Security Secretary, has unveiled today is a 1,000-page long agenda. Too long for me to dive in, but basically this is all about Britain making sure that it sticks to its plans to become a green economy, really now, but by 2030 in some instances, and by 2035 if it is to stick to this pledge of making Britain the cheapest place to use electricity. And this is all about the war in Ukraine. This is what has really resurged this discussion, because I think the West are pretty much in agreement that Vladimir Putin has been able to weaponize energy, and they don't want to be in a situation that we found ourselves in, where energy bills are sky high and they're rocketing because of our dependence on gas coming from the continent. So they've put in this new strategy. They're investing millions of pounds into clean energy, renewable energy, and that will hopefully trickle down in time where we're not dependent on carbon emissions, and we're able to use clean energy, which is obviously electricity. And they say if they stick to the plan, this 1,000-page long plan, then hopefully we'll start seeing our bills come down, but obviously not this year or next.
Yeah, well, I guess in some years in the future. But Juliana, if I know anything about you, I know you're going to get back to those. Even if it's 1,000 pages, you're going to try to get into it, Juliana. Well, thank you so much. We'll talk to you at 1:30.
I've got a little bit. Yes.
See? All right, Juliana. All right, now, so let's head back home here in Nigeria and head to the markets with Will. Will Abong.
Good morning, Nini.
Good morning, Will. I mean, Will comes with a different news today. First time this week.
Yeah,
she comes with
I
a
should
green
see
market.
smiles on your face, Nini, because it's green, all green, and nearly 1%. Nearly 1% up yesterday.
Yes.
It's fantastic to know that Dangote Cement, which brought down the market the day before, well, actually one that lifted the market up yesterday.
Naira it's added to its share price.
This is a very good one.
I don't know how they moved the market that much. 14 Naira is a lot.
It's a lot of money. Investors
on one share price.
Investors are probably seeing something, that I'm, looking at the market trend and saying this is the time to go dive in. So the markets rose yesterday, recorded its first positive performance for the week. We saw buying interest in Dangote Cement that lifted it 0.9% yesterday to settle at 53,603 points. Market cap at 29 trillion naira mark. Month to date and year to date returns now. Still month to date is still in negative territory, 4%, while year to date is in positive territory, but at 4.6%. Now we're going to talk to Oluwaseun Dosunmu, is the head research at Parthian Securities Limited, to give us what happened in the market yesterday. Good morning, Dosunmu. It's good to have you on the program.
Good morning, Will. Here.
So we saw what happened in the market yesterday. It's a bit of a yo-yo now. Investors are looking at Dangote Cement. They brought down the market on Tuesday. Now Wednesday, it brought the market back up. Is it a game of yo-yo for investors here for Dangote Cement?
Thank you for that question. So basically, what we're seeing is that we're not seeing as much activities as we have been seeing since the start of the year. We know that generally the level and the volume of activities has actually declined. If you look at, let's not look at just yesterday's activities, but looking at the market historically, you would see that historically, in the last 5 years, March has been known to be a profit-taking month, and we've actually seen that come into play this year. January and February, closed in the positive, and that has been largely due to buying activities as regards release of corporate earnings and corporate actions. Now that we've seen the dust has settled, we've seen the results, we've seen we've seen dividend declarations. Now investors are actually now watching to see what's going to happen in the markets. We know that recently the Monetary Policy Committee actually hiked interest rates again by 50 basis points to 18%. Now investors are actually watching to see what's happening. We saw the auction yesterday, and the auction came in at 14.7%, which was way higher than anticipated. So now investors are actually going to look at this, and we know that the month is coming to an end tomorrow. Investors are actually going to have a sit down and look at what is happening in the fixed income markets. Also given the fact that if you look at the maturities, fixed income maturities coming in the month of April alone, you see that that is about the maturities coming in the month of April is about 1.4 trillion naira alone. So that is a lot of funds, and I believe that that's one of the reasons why CBN decided to still hike interest rates.
Okay, Sean, talking about earnings, I just want to cut you there because I need us to talk about this. So we saw earnings have come in, and Zenith Bank was a bit of an unexpected surprise. Now, did the loss after taxes come as a surprise for you for Zenith Bank?
Oh, actually, to an extent, and that's because if you look at the numbers objectively, the revenue lines were actually strong. We saw the impressive double-digit growth, about 24% growth in gross earnings, about 26% year-on-year growth in interest income. Non-interest income also increased double-digit. I think it's about 23%. Customers' deposits, there was an increase. But then if you look at the other side, you see that impairments also grew by 105%, and that's basically due to the impact of Ghana's sovereign debt restructuring program. We all know the issue that Ghana is currently facing, and as such, the bank had to make provisions for that. But the provisions they made increased by over 140%. 5%. Also, the interest expense increased by 63%. So basically, that is as a result of the hike in interest rate. I mean, like I mentioned, interest rate now is about the monetary policy rate is about 18%, and as such, that has affected a lot of businesses. I mean, we've seen that finance costs for a lot of companies have actually shot up, and it affected, companies' earnings, especially for the fourth quarter. And it might also do the same too for the Q1 results. I mean, a lot of investors are also looking at that. But going back to Zenith Bank.
So we would want to have time to talk about this, but we're actually running out of time, Joe. I wish we had more time talking about. This is how the market, we're going to be following how it works, how much exposure other banks have to Ghana's debt restructuring, and how much that will affect their earnings this quarter and the next. Thank you so much, Oluwaseun Dosunmu, Head of Research, Party and Securities Limited, for sharing your perspective on the program.
Thank you.
So, Ini,
well, about that Ghana exposure of Nigerian banks to Ghana, I had an informal conversation with some members of the central bank, and they assured us that Nigerian banks, even those operating in Ghana, are not so exposed, because there is a rule that, even the banks in Ghana must not access, capital back home, and those back home are not supposed to access even capital there. So that kind of puts protection,
like a ring fencing,
exactly, something like that. So we hope that
will help to,
I know the walls cannot stop sentiment, but I mean,
we're seeing that trickling.
Exactly. All right, Will. Thank you so much. See you at 1:30, and then we head straight to the crypto market and see that the market is greedier this morning than it was yesterday at 60. I went from about 57 yesterday, so looking good for the market. The market cap is up more than 0.5% there, and hitting $1.19 trillion. 24-hour volume more than 25% up, and Bitcoin still dominating the market with more than 46%. Price of Bitcoin we see there is at $28,616.56, but at one point it did hit $29,000. Bitcoin is running now, but let's talk to Solomon Amunde. I find out perhaps he knows why, even though we see that it has tapered. Solomon, good morning.
Good morning, Ini. Good morning.
So what are you guys doing to the price of Bitcoin? I was thinking that we're back to the bearish run, but we see that it recovered, even though it's now back to 28,000.
So basically, the market is actually reacting to what's happening in the financial world. We already heard about what happened to the Silicon Valley Bank and how most persons are running from banks, trying to pull funds from banks and looking for safe haven and safe assets where they can push their monies to. So basically, we heard the CEO of Binance, CZ, he also said that Binance had pulled out about $1 billion, which was their SAFU funds, and they'll be converting it to Bitcoin and Ethereum. That's like about a week ago. So we are seeing more of such effects affecting the market positively, more like white swan events that are actually affecting the market. And these are some of the stuffs pushing the price of Bitcoin above $28,000 and also holding it above that price.
All right, Solomon, thank you so much. Fortunately, that's the much we can take. Solomon, a quick look at the top gainers, CFX, ARB, and all of that, but single digits gains, even though CFX is looking really good, almost 10% in the positive. We can see the top losers. Can we have the top losers before we go? All right, there you go. The top losers also there, really red, but at least we have the top gainers leading. But that's the much we can take on the program today. Thank you so much for being a part of Business Morning today. We'll have the final one for the month and the week tomorrow. Promises to be an interesting one. You don't want to miss it, but please join Will Ebong at 1:30 for Business Incorporated. We'll bring you updates and developments in the world of business. I'll see you at 10 p.m. during the Stock Market Report. Until then, make some money and be happy.